everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to welcome you to Aiden Vetterlein. Thesis Defense. My name is Rachel Wolf. I'm his mentor, and I'd like to thank the panel that is here. And just to let everyone know, Aiden is going to present his work, and when he's done, the panel is going to ask questions. And once the panel is done, we will open it up, and anyone is allowed to ask a question. I'd like to remind everyone this is not a critique, but this is an opportunity in which to ask Aiden more questions, to maybe learn a bit more about the work and his process. And so with that, I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones and take it away.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to my Thesis Defense and short film screening. I'd like to start this gathering by showing you my film and explaining to you my goals and inspirations before showing it to you again. Then go into explaining my process of making it before ultimately letting you watch it a third time. Before I do play it, I'd like to give an epilepsy trigger warning. It does contain a few flashing yellow and orange light scenes. I'd now like to give an overview of my project's objectives to those who know nothing about it, and just to remind those who heard me speak during my proposal, since that was some time ago. I'm a photographer first and foremost, and certainly not an animation major or minor. Light and the ways in which it can be manipulated has always attracted me. I love the variety of ways you can capture a moment on camera to elicit a desired interpretation. Over the past several years, I've been assisting with photo shoots at Polera, a commercial photo studio in Portland. During my time with the studio, I've tried to absorb as much practical lighting, styling, and camera angle approach as possible. But above all else, in both my personal and commercial practice, I'm driven by curiosity to learn new skills. This project allowed me to be my own boss and assistant, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. But ultimately, this juggling of roles left me with an accurate sense of what it takes to make a film, and how to do so as a one-man team. This is valuable because we don't always have a team of collaborators ready to assist with actualizing our creative visions. Stop motion appealed to me for this project because it is so strongly rooted in photography, while allowing for more narrative depth than a single image is capable of. I wanted to tell a story simply because I wanted to do something creative for my thesis. I also desired to revisit filmmaking with more photography skills than I had when I made short films in my childhood. I was introduced to stop motion at a young age with Legos by my friend Quinn Bentley. At the time, Quinn's father worked at Lego in the special effects department. The magic of seeing inanimate objects spring to life on screen is as remarkable to me today as it was back when Quinn showed me the basics. Growing up, my mom always pushed me to pursue creative concepts. She loved to see me attempt to depict ideas that sprang forth from my own brain. Having lost my mom almost a year and a half ago, a large driving force in my thesis was my memory of her. I know she would love the commercial photography I've been pursuing, but I also know she would love even more to have seen me bring my own story to life. This film is dedicated to Aiden Vetterlein. My film, titled No Wrong Turns, conveys through visual metaphors that are vacant of human depiction, the very human experience of avoiding and confronting decisions. The film uses automobiles as the vehicle of this message. I chose cars to play a significant role in this film because I myself am a car guy. The Impreza depicted in the film is based on my 1999 Subaru Impreza 2.2, which I've owned and been modifying for 6 years. All of the interior clips in the film were shot in my own Impreza, and in a sense, the car in the film represents myself. Over my time at PNCA, I've faced a lot of scrutiny whenever I chose to use cars for subject matter in my projects. Because of this, I saw my film as an excellent opportunity to show that cars in art allow viewers to question the relationship between humans and machines and are a viable subject matter for embedding messages behind. The decision to not have humans behind the wheel was half fueled by a desire to show that cars alone are enough to carry a message, but also out of a desire to minimize my work on set filming. Incorporating humans would have required even more planning and time shooting. For a first major stop motion, I chose to simplify my approach whenever possible without sacrificing significant story elements. The visuals in my film are heavily influenced by early VFX practitioners such as Ray Harryhausen as well as Phil Tippett. I love their use of practical effects and giving non-human characters memorable personalities on screen. I appreciate Ray's style of animation for its realism of movement while still carrying clues of its construction. I particularly resonate with Phil Tippett's approach to filmmaking. They don't walk into a story fully, but instead react to what they interpret the film needs and add it during the course of production. Phil expressed that this was an integral part of their approach to their film, Mad God, which took 30 years to complete, largely due to them returning to add on to it again and again. I added several scenes during the making of my film and modified angles for others that weren't originally planned for in my script. I felt the additions were needed for pacing, and that the script was an excellent base to build on, but something I could improve on as I saw the scenes play into each other while shooting. Sometimes you don't realize you could use more close-up shots until you see all the real scenes together. Stephen King's movie Christine set the mood without using dialogue. This was a huge influence on me and fueled my desire to try the same. It's a film about a ghostly car that is possessive towards its owner. The film beautifully sets different moods with its soundtrack, as well as dramatic lighting choices to create an atmosphere of intimidation and suspense surrounding the vehicle. Rod Sterling's Twilight Zone has this ability to convey very simple but arguably beautiful allegories for life through eccentric, fantastical, eerie sci-fi stories. This was a huge inspiration for me in using an eerie and uncanny manner of tone to convey my story. I'm a big fan of surreal stories and wanted to try my hand at making one. Something that also inspires me about the Twilight Zone is that it can be enjoyed purely for its cinematography and visual appeal, or the viewer can look deeper for a more allegorical message to take away from it. This was my goal with my film. I wanted a simple underlying message with deeper implications, and I devised this story to let me create the visuals I wanted to make while achieving an underlying message I resonate with. We've all avoided a decision or two before. The story is intended to portray that avoiding a situation often leads us back to being asked to confront that same decision. Whether that decision is a road choice, a job, a person, or anything in between, I hope viewers can resonate with this depiction of decisiveness in one way or another, whether that be remembering something you once avoided or are currently avoiding. But I am absolutely okay with individuals walking away having just enjoyed the visuals and not even considering the underlying meaning. Hell, there are Twilight Zone episodes I've only watched for the visual experience, and this film was meant to be a visual experience above all else. I additionally think strong visuals allow viewers to have their attention held by a piece and drive them more to search for meaning behind those visuals. No Wrong Turns is a combination of mediums I've worked with in the past, photo, video, and sound, but I've never unified into a cohesive project together. It was meant to teach me new skills while exploring stop motion as a craft and storytelling device. And in the making of this film, and the subsequent trial by fire I experienced, that is exactly what I believe it accomplished. Many lessons learned during the process will not soon be forgotten, but I'll get to some of those a little later. And for now, I'd like to ask you to watch the film once again, now knowing some of my intentions behind making it. Wow, that was like the whole time.
Just that.
Oh my goodness. Interesting. Worrying. But okay. That was No Wrong Turns for you. I hope you all enjoyed watching the final film on the big screen as much as I did. Having shared with you my objectives and influences before showing the film a second time, I'd like to now focus on how I made this film. Being a one-man team, and I wore a lot of hats. And while I can stand here and tell you it's totally possible to make a short film all by yourself, I hope to also explain to you how difficult as well as rewarding it can be. Additionally, I hope to possibly save one of you time and trial and error testing during your own stop-motion projects. I'd like to start talking about my process by focusing on how I went through pre-production. This process started roughly 2 weeks after spring semester ended and finished a couple weeks into July. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to take 2 independent studies over the summer to help me with my approach to stop motion. One of those independent studies was with Aiden Vetterlein from PNCA's animation department, who specialize in storyboarding and are a remarkable asset to this institution. Robin helped me come up with a schedule for getting pre-visualization done and checked in and reviewed my progress along the way. He also provided numerous useful tips not only in pre-visualization, but also in regard to set construction. I was tasked first with creating a script, then a storyboard and camera mapping, and finally an animatic to get a sense of timing and flow between scenes. And yes, I know, my drawing skills are horrendous, but I was the only one that had to understand the meaning of them. Creating visual representations for all of these project considerations helped me to think through a ton of future problems I might encounter. I had no real experience doing any of these tasks before working with Robin, and they helped me hone my story in and ensure it would be cohesive. It was also a great practice in some creative problem-solving skills. The entire time I was working on this pre-visualization, I also had the task of working on set components and the model cars needed for the film. I attacked the cars first because there would be no film at all without them. I chose a 1974 Porsche 911 Turbo and a 1994 Subaru Impreza GT. These cars are both off-road rally racing legends that are well at home in a desert environment, but also signify a battle between new and old, as well as German versus Japanese automobiles. I wanted the cars to have practical lights. In fact, I insisted on it, mostly out of a desire to not have to learn to mimic the effect of headlights and taillights in After Effects, but also out of a belief that practical effects, and in this case, practical lighting, are hard, if not impossible, to accurately emulate during editing, especially if you're an After Effects novice like I am. I also thought wiring lights would be a fun and attainable challenge. I found a company that makes LED kits for model cars powered by watch batteries. I had virtually no experience building model cars, so I opted for retrofitting these lights into already assembled 1/24th scale die-cast models. For the lights, I was forced to dismantle the cars to house them. I removed the Porsche's rear engine and made room in the engine bay where it housed the battery and switches. I ran the LEDs right behind the headlights and taillight holes, which I expanded with a drill bit. The Porsche was done quickly and smoothly. The on and off switch could be easily accessed by opening the rear engine bay trunk that was already on hinges. The Impreza required a lot of modification. The headlight wiring access was blocked by internal structures cast into the metal and did not allow for headlight illumination. I said so be it and decided the Impreza's front lights would be wired to the fog light housing instead due to its accessibility. Another issue with wiring the Impreza was creating an operable on and off switch without an openable trunk, where the switch and battery were to be housed. This was necessary to ensure I would not be fully disassembling the models between takes. I opted for drilling a hole in the bottom of the car's plastic undercarriage, which let me press the button with a pen to turn on the lights. The last big hurdle with the Impreza was the front steering rack. The model came with the front wheels locked in place, and for a film where the cars are going around corners, this simply would not be desirable. After some thinking on it, I bought a cheap, same-scale model of a Volvo 240 that I knew had an adjustable front steering rack. I cut the rack out of the Volvo and the front wheel assembly out of the Impreza, and then realized the Volvo wheelbase was far shorter than the Impreza. So taking a chance, I cut the steering rack rod in half, epoxied the two sides at the width I wanted in the Impreza, and then joined the rack rod back together with a longer metal segment. Yes, I know, this is a headache and a half, but bam, I then had rotating front wheels for turning scenes. And did it come out perfectly? No. But did it work for what I was trying to do? Yes. In fact, I like how the new front wheels lowered the overall ride height of the car. And if you look closely when pausing scenes in the film, you can see the Volvo name in the center cap of the Impreza's front wheels. I find artifacts of the hand of the makers, such as the wheel caps, fun. They add clues to my process that might not be noticed unless you're looking closely. Now it came time for me to start set construction. For this, I quickly realized my initial 4x4 foot set idea was out of the question. It was far too small. I doubled it and made my set 4 by 8 feet, held up by 4 sawhorses that could each hold 1,200 pounds. I fixed 2 4 by 4 foot long, 3/4 inch thick wood sheets together using 2 by 4 inch planks running underneath all 4 sides of the set. This allowed it to be sturdy and not move unintendedly. When every frame of a film requires a set in one position, the last thing you want is unintended movement. I originally designed the set in a 4/4 system to allow me to remove 2 by 4 foot quarters of the set, so I'd be able to get the camera closer for scenes. I entirely ditched this system after shooting one scene, due to it taking hours to dismantle and reassemble the setup, and the camera angles were fine as is. Small note, learned from my mistake, use bolts and not screws, they're far easier to dismantle. Another suggestion that I have to share with you is to specifically design your set to be a comfortable working height for several hour periods. Mine was roughly 2.5 feet off the ground and locked at that height because of my sawhorse support choice. I had to do some serious yoga stretching sessions after long shoots in order to get my back to forgive me. Not so fun, please think of your back's comfort when building sets. With a base set completed, I needed to cover it with sand. And after a failed Home Depot run, I found a great fine-grained terrarium sand for sale in 5-pound increments, cheap on Amazon. During my proposal test film, I got feedback that the loose sand made it seem like the car was plowing through rather than driving on the sand. I couldn't have this effect in my final film, so I used washable Elmer's glue diluted with water and sprayed it on the boards in between applying layers of sand. It took roughly 28 pounds of sand to cover my set. With sand laid down, I needed the rest of the environment: trees, rocks, and hills. I started with the hills. Robin recommended using foam that I covered with clay, and I did just that, but as I worked, I started incorporating more into the process. I procured a bunch of styrofoam from a recycling plant for free and gave it some new life on my set. I would first pick at the foam by hand until it resembled the shape I wanted. Then I boiled clay in water until it was viscous enough to be applied with a paintbrush on the foam. After applying that, I covered it with a final coat of diluted Elmer's glue and sand for true sandy color and texture. Along the way, I started incorporating spray insulation foam before applying clay or sand. This allowed me to get bulbous surfaces without using styrofoam. But man, does that spray insulation stuff stick to your hands? Please wear gloves if you use it. I learned the hard way with that one. Towards the end of hill making, I also tried using high-density foam I found recycled as scrap, and followed the horizontal cutting instructions described by a YouTuber who I'd watched for making sedimentary rocks. I'm most proud of those hills, even though there's only 2 of them in the film, and it's a prime example of how YouTube tutorials effectively aided me in my approach to set fabrication. I found YouTube diorama builders really inspiring during my entire set building process, and tried to incorporate some of their approaches whenever possible, whether that took the form of sculpting style, painting technique, or material choice. YouTube is awesome for it all. The biggest hill in the movie is the fork in the road mound separating the 2 paths. This hill I made in 2 segments, so I could remove the rear segment for the film's clips that have the camera perspective behind the hill looking down at the road. This 2-piece hill design worked well to let me get the camera position just right behind the hill when the time came. Overall, I created a variety of hills, both 3D for the set foreground and 2D for distant hills at the back of my set in front of my backdrop. For the 2D hills, I also tried to give them texture so the light would not cast entirely flat upon them. Trees were a tedious process, but it needed a set element for filling an otherwise vacant desert. For trees, I did the most instinctual thing I could think of. I found twigs with dense branching segments and hot glued them together into little bundles. I then painted them with acrylic paint a dark shade. These were straightforward, but took time to build up a stockpile of them. I made roughly 40 trees of various sizes for the film. A few proved to be far too big and saw no use, but all the others earned their keep. Some of the trees were not much taller than a matchstick and worked well for emulating distance between the camera and the tree. I remember at one point, when talking about my trees with Robin, they said, "Well, does it look like a tree or does it look like your version of a tree?" It did look like my version of a tree, and I liked that. In fact, I started approaching the set from a similar point of view. It isn't a depiction of a real desert, it's a depiction of my version of a desert, and that meant I got to set the standards to hold my fabricating up to. Now for the road and rocks, I decided rather than make an actual road to instead define where the road is using the environment. I bordered the driving regions with trees, hills, and rocks that were actually painted tinfoil. I also kept getting asked by peers, why not use real rocks, Aiden? Because I wanted a lot of texture on them so the light would not hit a smooth surface, and I wanted a controlled variety of sizes and color. Nearly every scene required me to build a new road outline with rocks and to hot glue them in place. The fork in the road scenes required me to build over 100 more rocks since I saved those scenes for last. Now that you know how I approach set building, I'd like to talk to you about lighting and pre-production tests. Lighting was a big focus of this film for me and something I didn't want to put off until shooting my first scene. I wanted viewers to walk away thinking, that was well shot. So I took a second independent studies course over the summer with lighting instructor and commercial photographer J.D. White. J.D. really helped me assess what needed to be figured out lighting-wise, as well as how to approach camera operation. I did tests of moonlight and backdrop distance, as well as light strengths and dust clouds very early on in the set building. In fact, before I even had sand on my set. JD also helped hypothesize ways I could tackle stars without a green screen. In my internet research for adding stars, I found a tutorial on how to add the effect of stars in Photoshop. Stars are actually various layers of noise stacked in different shades that emulate glow and differences in color. Understanding early on how I could tackle stars really helped give me confidence in my decision to not use a green screen. I did not want to use a green screen because it would require complex lighting to properly illuminate for keyframing and After Effects, as well as had potential to give undesirable spill-off green light onto my set. Another major camera approach JD helped me figure out was how I would do a top-down shot of my set for the near-collision head-on-head clip in the film. This involved using two C-stands with their clamping knuckles that hold at either end a Home Depot sourced thick metal rod. This rod went across and above my set, and the C-stands allowed it to be raised or lowered as desired. A clamp was then fixed to the rod in the center, and a tripod head was attached to that clamp. This allowed me to get a top-down perspective without fancy setup. Just a trip to Home Depot and borrowing one more C-stand. Testing these approaches before shooting was critical to not having to backtrack once I did start shooting. And as for shooting, just like everything in this project, it started later than scheduled. It really began about 2 weeks into August and ended in early October, just in time for midterms. I remember having a serious panic attack after shooting my first two scenes in twos, or 12 frames per second rather than 24 frames per second. I hated the lack of fluidity in the animation. That's when I reached for help with timing to Robin and Rand. Rand Shang was amazing enough to sit down with me and go over frame rate modification in the Dragon Frame and Adobe Premiere software. It also helped me understand I don't have to lock into one frame rate for the entire shooting of the film. This helped me come to the decision to shoot every scene at 24 frames per second, if not higher in some cases. This also meant it was going to take twice as long as I'd originally thought to animate the motions on set. But I wanted the fluidity of motion, and 12 frames per second would not cut it. An important aspect to note about shooting each scene was my decision to emulate dust clouds trailing behind the cars. This was not a decision I made lightly. It effectively gave me 1 to 2 more movement paths I had to animate every frame of during a given driving scene. I just knew that cars in the desert made clouds of dust and wanted to do my best to bring that reality into my film. Even if it at times looks a bit cartoony, I like this cartoony quality to the dust because it showed more of the hand of the maker and gave more of a pause from emulated realism on set. The dust clouds were bricked up cotton balls that were fabric dyed a tan shade to achieve a closer to sand aesthetic. As I continued to shoot, I devised a non-chronological list of scenes I would shoot based on the set I would need. I sorted the list based on if I need more length or width of the set for the camera perspectives I desired, which meant I had to rotate my set 3 times to accomplish these perspectives. But I also ordered my scenes off of how many contain the same environment, so clips that feature identical environments are shot one after the other cohesively and to make use of already implemented set components to save time. Most commonly reused set pieces were the rocks signifying the road, since that gluing process consumed a ton of time alone. It's since so many clips take place at the fork in the road, I saved these for last during my model set shooting, so I could do them all at once. That said, the real last clip shot were all the car interior clips, because I knew while different in technical approach from my models, they would be quicker to capture from lack of objects made in animation. Every time the set changed, I was forced to tear down the rocks signifying the road, hills, and trees to build a new environment. Every time they were hot glued in place, and even that didn't always keep them in place. I got good at changing the set, but even so, it would take at least 2 hours to recompose the set and glue it, and at least 1 hour to redial in the light and camera for the change of environment. I tried whenever possible to prepare the set the day before I would be shooting the scene, but with limited time, I did often have to fit it all into one day to stay on schedule for completing my shooting. Some days were obscenely long, 2 scenes taking 14 hours to complete, and then doing an 8-hour shooting day to yield a 2-second clip less than 24 hours later. It was grueling at times, especially when you spend half a day on a clip that you immediately have to reshoot for X or Y reason. Mess-ups did happen, but I learned quickly which ones could be masked in editing versus ones that could not and definitely required a scene reshoot. If a tree falls over and you have a stationary camera, you can most likely mask that in editing and keep moving as intended. Tree falls over and your camera is on the slider, you're pretty much never going to be able to correct that in editing due to the tree's shifting position on camera. I listened to a lot of podcasts and several books on tape during these long days of shooting. I ate a ton of Cliff Bars and sacrificed sleep to meet certain shooting schedules. It was rough as hell being a one-man team, and I kept joking that I dug this grave, I'm gonna dig myself out. But along the way digging myself out, I started to see the magic that made me want to see it through. Seeing clips play into each other cohesively that were shot weeks apart, and seeing how they in fact were conveying the visuals and underlying messages I had written into my script months ago. This made me instantly forget the hours of laborious shooting that went into them. There is a sense of magic to creating a desert world people can escape to if for just 2 minutes. This is what kept pushing me. I wanted to see all these clips that took hours and hours to make flow into each other, and to prove to myself that I can be a one-man team when needed, and I can build a damn world for people to escape to. And you know what? With that in mind, I finished shooting ahead of schedule. But it never really felt like I was ahead of schedule, even when I technically was. Being a one-man team, I knew it just meant that I had more time to tackle the next objective. After shooting all my scenes, editing and sound collaboration were next. Stars were a nightmare as I had feared they might be. While the end results warranted the time spent, the actual completion of them was far more tedious than anything prior in the project. Adding stars required me to mask them into the sky of all clips with a visible skyline, and to do so to every frame of a given clip. While I could copy and paste the star mask efficiently for all the frames of clips with a stationary camera, I could not do that for slider shots where the hills shift with each frame. This caused star masks that worked for the prior frame to no longer work for the next, as they would sit on now shifted hills. For these, I had to painstakingly draw a new star mask for each frame as the camera moved over the course of the clip. For some of those slider shots, the stars took over 5 hours to mask in, but to me it was worth it because I love the end results. In the editing phase, I also took all of the car interior stereo shots and created scrolling text animations in Photoshop. I had tested this for my proposal, so it was rather straightforward. It's a bit hard to explain concisely, but if anyone is curious about this in particular, just ask and I'll provide a bit more detail. Along with stars and stereos, I had to mask all the artifacts of my errors present in some clips. Trees or rocks being bumped or lights flickering. This was easy business compared to the stars. I'm happy with these clips, but if you look close at just the right spot, you might still find an artifact of my clumsiness on set. With stars and errors on set corrected, editing moved from Photoshop to Adobe Premiere. I had to teach myself through YouTube tutorials how to color correct and color grade in the software. And I really loved this phase of editing, so much easier than I had worried it might be. It noticeably made each clip's visuals pop just a bit more. A big part of finalizing the film in the editing process was finalizing the sound. Now it is time for me to shout out Aiden Vetterlein, my my musical messiah for this project. We had several meetings to talk about the emotive tone and goals of the soundtrack early on, before I'd even begun shooting. They hit the nail on the head with the progressive synths and worked with me up until the end to create updated versions that fit different film draft lengths. I'm so thankful for Quinn's help with the sound on this film, so proud of the results, and so very grateful to have his name in the credit sequence. I threw Quinn a curveball after we sorted out the soundtrack, and he did an excellent job tackling it. During midterms, I was pushed to make sound effects not just included in the film, but to prioritize them. I was daunted by this task at first, but after some testing of ideas for sourcing accurate engine audio for the cars, I ultimately decided to record straight from my computer sound card sound effects from the hit video game Dirt Rally 2. This allowed me to control nearly identical cars to the model ones I was using on set. It ensured I had terrain and engine audio as close to my model cars as possible. The reason you see my name next to Foley Artist in the credits is because I created all the necessary sound effects in Dirt Rally. But I'm not a great mixing and mastering artist like Quinn is. I gave these sound effects to Quinn with an annotated draft of the film, telling him what should go where. He didn't just add them, but blended them organically into the film so that the panning matches the direction of the car, or the engine audio difference is noticeable from outside to inside of the Impreza. Quinn helped bring this film to life through sound. And that brings us to where we are today. It's done, it's got sound, and it meets my standards. I did just about exactly what I set out to do while making as few compromises as possible along the way. I set out to make a 1-minute film last winter and ended up with a film over 2 minutes long. I learned a lot in the process of making it. I learned I have a high standard for visuals and the stamina needed to ensure I can achieve my goals, even if it means sometimes taking twice as much time to do so. I learned that I'm crafty. I didn't know I could build a set or rig lights in a model car a year ago. I learned that I like flexibility in my projects and being able to adapt a story or visuals that accompany it at any point in production in order to fulfill my adaptive vision. I learned what it means to be alone with a large project and a looming deadline and how to tackle it in bite-sized chunks. I learned I like to push myself to be as efficient as possible even when I'm ahead of schedule. I learned how and why I should ask for help when I start going out of my realm of knowledge. And above all else, I relearned something I let myself forget quite some time ago. I love to tell stories through film, and I don't have to just practice still photography. So once again, I hope you enjoyed the film, even if just for the visuals. I'm here today to tell you that you can have a simple concept behind your art, and you can enjoy work for just the visual experience. Having shared my intentions, and now my process in making this film, I'd like to invite you all to view the film a third time, bearing in mind this newly shared information. close the speech by quoting a book that had a tremendous impact on me while working on scenes in this film. The risk of all creatives. Every project has as many obstacles as it does solutions, and with each one is the chance that you might not end up satisfied with the results, or that others might not be satisfied with them either. We can't wait to tell you about them. Adam Savage, Every Tool's a Hammer. Well, I'm here, I'm satisfied, and while I hope you are too, I'm quite ready to hear why you are or might not be. Thank you again for attending my screening tonight. I'd like to open up the floor for questions from the panel now. And also have the video looping in the background for y'all to just gaze at.
I guess I'll start. I'm curious about what kinds of notes you gave the composer, and how you think the music influences the overall vibe of the film.
One of the main things I told him early on was I want this to have synths. I love the energy that synths bring into car videos, and they give it kind of this retro nostalgia aspect to it. And also it does make it feel like it's building towards something. That's an impression I wanted the sound to leave in the audience. But I also left it very open for him to do what he thought would be best for the project. And along the way, I made a couple of suggestions, like I think that you're getting to this counter melody a little bit too late, or maybe you could bring it in a little bit earlier and start fading it out. But I did leave a lot of it open for Quinn's interpretation. He had access to the film and knew kind of the tone I wanted it to have, but he gave it his best world, as much as I did with the visuals.
So for this,
thanks, Aiden. This has been so awesome to see your whole process exposed. And I think you've just done a phenomenal job with this. I'm interested in if you could sort of unpack some of the language that you were using with the camera to create and suggest movement. So I'm noticing there's some things you're doing with focus, with moving the camera versus moving the objects. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about those choices specifically.
Yeah, I realized that the film definitely needed moments in it where the cars weren't moving, and it gave us, the audience, more time to actually consider that this is a pause and that car might be deciding on which path to go. But just having a single image or frame that you hold for several seconds, it starts to read like a single image. So for a lot of those stationary car parts in the film, I tried to give a panning shot for it, or to move the focus further out so that it doesn't feel like just a flat image that I'm holding for the period of that clip. Motion was something I definitely wanted to have throughout it. I've watched my fair share of driving films, and while I can't really do the having a car with the camera rig on it in front of or behind the cars on the set, I did try and give it that follow feeling through having a slider involved in a good amount of the chasing scenes. I love that slider now.
Can I ask a follow-up? With that movement of the camera and the way that you're sort of shifting like the focus in and out, did that also contribute to this element of personification of the car for you? Did you think about that connection, or was it more just about creating like what you were just talking about with points of interest and
Sorry, just writing that down. I guess in a sense, I did want to make the motion go with kind of the tone I wanted for that point in the film. So it feels a bit, I wanted the cars to feel more aggressive and intimidating for, say, that head-on-head clip. And I feel like throwing the viewer into that oncoming car is a good way to suggest that it's an intimidating object. I think that still camera clips, such as that one, they work well for giving you an idea of environment and direction of travel, but they don't do the best job for giving you a personality in that car, like you were saying. But a lot of it was just me trying to immerse the viewer, and that was my first thought when I planned a lot of these shots. I hope that answers your question.
Well, kind of jumping off of that, I want to first, commend you coming into this as a photographer, and now you've taken on the role of not only photographer, but lighting and prop building and editing. And it's quite phenomenal what you did without any experience. But coming into this as a photographer, and you've really been able to push the photography and the shooting of this. And I'd love to know a little bit more about the lighting, because I know that was something that was very important that you took a lot of time with. And some of maybe little tricks you might have learned or anything unexpected that came up that you didn't expect through all that lighting.
Yeah, totally. I did originally start out using a couple of lights that I borrowed from the school, and after testing them for a while, realized that they were way too strong for what I was trying to do. I needed lights that could get pretty dim, and even at their dimmest settings, they were still too bright. And I realized I'd have to return them to the school eventually, and with my shooting starting later than anticipated, I opted to get two very cheap panel lights. One of them is that one over there that I actually used on my set, as well as a Paul C-Buff DigiB 400, which was a bit more powerful, and that served as my moonlight. I would have one light, that stronger light, casting on a blue seamless backdrop to emulate the moon, as well as having two panel lights like that to provide fill light in the set foreground to create, to mimic where the moonlight would be casting, since the actual moonlight is facing the backdrop. This was pretty consistent throughout all the scenes, but I did have to consider with the direction of the cars changing from clip to clip, switching the moon from side to side, and then kind of playing with the fill light to make it look like the moonlight was casting from that direction. I definitely felt challenged with it on more clips than anticipated, but I'm pretty satisfied with the end results. And I can say that you can definitely do something like this with pretty cheap lights if you're tactical with them.
So after this project, do you think this is going to affect the way you approach lighting with your photography in the studio?
I think it gave me certainly a newfound appreciation for hot lights. I think I was kind of stuck in the photographer world of using strobes for everything I did. And I still definitely have a special place for strobes in my heart, but I'm definitely growing more fond of having a hot light and understanding that sometimes having weaker lights are far easier to work. It's far easier to work with on small scale sets like this. I mean, there were times where I could have used another even smaller light than that panel one, and then it just came down to not being able to color balance that small light as well as the others. So I opted for just sticking with my 3 lights, trying to stay consistent and not add any undesirable color temperatures in there. I did my best to balance them in Premiere, but that's one thing on my list that I would love to refine a bit more before submitting this elsewhere.
I'm curious to dig into some of the more metaphorical aspects of the story and just, I guess, hear more from you about the relationship between these cars. There seems to be a kind of confrontation or a dialogue of some kind. And you talked about this idea of decisions and this metaphor and literal depiction of the road. I'm curious to hear more about how do you see these two cars related to each other?
Absolutely. I'm very glad you asked that actually. 'Cause going through my speech just this morning, I was thinking how I needed to discuss more the role of that portion of film, and what I intended it to signify was possibly misinterpreting help, because this car does in a sense lead it back to making the decision to move forward at the end, but the whole time I wanted the viewer to question if that car is chasing it in the wrong direction or if it's a bad car, but really it's just pushing it back to come and choose one of the paths to go down at the end of the film.
So you mentioned that one of the inspirations like that you found was that you really like storytelling. Do you see yourself doing some more work like this, or maybe other storytelling through your photography in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I think first and foremost, I need to make sure I can actually get this publicized in a way that does all the work when it with justice, but I definitely would love to work on more short films going forward. And I think that the next stop motion one I do will have far less moving parts to it, maybe not 18 or so different environments, maybe just one, and maybe one character with a movement path instead of 2 to 4. I think that would be a fun change up from this, and I'd love to keep exploring stop motion. But I'm open to live action as well. I have some ideas in that department. Yeah, I'll get to the scripts after Thesis. That's what I've been saying.
Just to follow up to that, this is good timing, I guess. Out of all these roles that you took on for this, which one was your least favorite, and which one was your most favorite?
Ooh. No, most favorite would definitely be the cinematographer, because there's a lot of fun to be had there. The lens choice, camera angle or approach there. I think it's kind of the most logical transition from a photographer into video is cinematography, and I definitely found some joy in that role. But I think one of the hardest, I don't know if it was my least favorite, because there's some predictability to it, but doing I guess it would be compositing, or when I'm adding in my stars, that was brutal. It was like a couple weeks of me just painstakingly drawing in these masks to make sure that they worked. But I mean, going forward, I could become a master of keyframing, and that's just no longer my approach to doing stars. But it was painful.
I'd love to know where you see this film going from here. Is this something to submit, to show, to get out there in the world in other ways?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely gonna get the obligatory upload to YouTube so that I can send it to people that couldn't make it, but have been following the project. But I really do want to make sure it goes into film festivals, because a lot of work went into it, and I think there's something to be said for entering a project that's only got 2 to 3 people in the credits. It's kind of an interesting little thing there. But I do want to refine it a bit more before I do that. I mean, I was working with Quinn while he, on the music side of things, and from several states away, they're all the way in New York. And so it was a little bit hard to get some things super dialed in, and also on my editing side, there's things I'd like to dial in a little bit more. I'm hoping in the next couple of months, Quinn can sit down, do a couple of tweaks to sound effects specifically, and I can do a little bit more with a couple of framing things, or sorry, timing things in certain clips that me, having seen this 1,000 times, stands out pretty vividly, and maybe explore more with color grading, because that's interesting to me, and I think I did an okay job for a first film, but I could still refine it even more and learn more about that process.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions.
say amazing job. This is phenomenal for participating in all this side of it. I wanted to ask, between the shots of like your actual car and the model, is there anything specifically you had to do to make them seem the same scale, even though one is like, 64 times bigger than the other? Or?
At the end of the day, not really. I mean, the biggest thing was trying to get similar color in both of them, so that it wouldn't stand out too much. And I do feel like I could have dialed down the lights for the interior shots of the car a little bit more to match that moonlight, but it's going to look about the same as the models regardless of, I shouldn't say regardless, but without much you have to do. I mean, the camera lens did change. I switched to a vintage lens setup for all the interior shots. They were done with old Olympus lens that I converted to fit a Canon EF mount. And I liked what it did for blurring things a bit more, because I realized that, I guess that is one thing I did change to try and make it seem similar, was to have less sharpness inside of the interior clips, just to kind of throw you off and make you question the scale of things. But not as hard as I was thinking it would be. Sorry, it's really hard for me to see over the slide, but you guys can do it.
Shout out.
I'm interested in your title, Your Own Terms.
Oh yes, my fun little double entendre. It's supposed to be, maybe when you're watching it and you know the title, that you question the car being chased. Oh, it can't make any wrong turns, that's why it's being chased. Or it can't make any wrong turns, meaning every turn that it makes is an acceptable one to take. So it could have turned left at the end, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, I was curious, about the significance of the check engine light, conceptually what that does to the piece, and then B, also, what's like a big lesson you wish you could go back to the beginning of this with, or that you'll carry into the next project that you do?
Check engine light, and also the stereo scrolling text was supposed to be me saying that maybe to look inward, like there's a problem, address it, like that's the check engine light. This car is not actually like deciding to continue and make a choice to go down the road further, it just turns back around. That's why it's saying like, hey, stop, check engine, look inward. But also the user input decided, or the user input required, that was me trying to say that, okay, it's time to make a decision, and then their decision is actually just to turn around. And I had originally planned for a third stereo clip at the very end after it takes the right path, or the literal right path, I shouldn't say. That said user input accepted, and I thought that after seeing it in the film, it made it a little bit too cheesy and obvious what I was trying to do there, and it also didn't look right for being the last clip that the film ends on, and I really liked the last clip being that crossroads. But yeah, that's kind of me trying to say looking inward there. And as for the lesson that I wish I could go back in time and tell myself or carry on into the next one, it would be probably to simplify approach whenever possible. And I mean, that's easier said than done, you know? I set a certain goal for this film that I wanted to see through, and like I said, I dug this variable, laid myself out, but I could have dug a little shallower grade and had a much easier time digging myself out. But also, I could have decided, maybe I do want to involve more collaborators, and that would have lessened a lot of workload depending on what they were helping me with. And I think that's something I want to carry on going forward, is don't be afraid to involve others in your creative projects.
And it's an amazing amount of work that you did. I think you did a very good job.
Thank you, I appreciate that a lot.
Any other
think if I wanted to expand on this project itself, I think it would have been nice to not have as tight of a schedule so that I could have added more of the things that I thought it needed. I mean, those two panning shots at the first part in the film where the car stops at the crossroads and pans to show both vehicles, neither of those were written into my script. I added those. I thought that it needed more time to be stagnant there and allow viewers to contemplate the decisions being made or avoided, I guess. And I think being able to add more clips like that would have been nice, and to have maybe a few more close-ups and try and get just the wheel spinning or something. But I tried to focus on what I had written into my script, and then add only really what I had time for and thought was most essential. Another one that I added that wasn't in my script was the scene towards the end of just the slider moving with a Porsche sitting there stationary before the Impreza comes back to the crossroads, because I thought, once again, there needs to be more of a moment for the audience to understand that there's a transition being made here. That car is now in a different location than it was in the prior clip. Things like that are nice to have the freedom. It's nice to have the freedom to add things like that, but when you are facing a deadline, it kind of has to come a time when you say, this meets my initial goals, I'm comfortable moving on to the next steps. And I definitely did that with this, but I tried to compromise as little as I could.
Anyone else?
I have a question about the Porsche and what, like, behind the decision to have it come from the left side of the path.
I guess I also wanted that to be another thing that people question, because I thought that it could also be significant or signifying that that vehicle took that path and it did not like where it led them, and so they're actually pushing the Impreza onto the other path because they view that as the better path that they wish they had taken.
I guess a follow-up, is there a specific reason why it is then parked in the middle of the crossroads?
Yes. I guess just to say, you make your own decision. I'm not going to stop you. 'Cause at that point, it's not bearing the path any longer.
Any other questions? I can't see. Oh, is there anyone else?
Yeah, I was really interested by how the Porsche sort of moves around, like, it almost seems like it moves locations a lot, like you can't follow it sometimes. Just sort of curious what was the motivation behind that, because I found it really interesting.
Absolutely. That was kind of coming from, like I noted, the eerie kind of Twilight Zone inspiration of things that don't quite make sense in reality. I mean, a car that just is chasing you at 1 second, disappears in your taillights or in your rearview mirror, and then appears down the road later on. I wanted to kind of give that an intimidating, unpredictable presence, where it could be behind you 1 second and then in front of you the next. Yeah, that's about it.
Sorry, it's really hard for me to see. When you were talking about your process, you spoke a little bit about that you will appreciate like when you see in the hand of the animator. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about where you see like your hands in this piece.
I mean, having made it everywhere, but more visibly, there's things that on a perfectly polished set would not be allowed to be there. There's little bits of tinfoil poking out from the rocks to give them a little bit of shimmer and like white spots, and you normally want to cover that up. There's areas where if you pause it, you can see hot glue on the set. Stuff like that stands out to me, as well as why is one of the Impreza taillights cracked on the left right there? Because I didn't do the best job removing it when I put in the LEDs. I think I could have been very concerned with making sure it was all perfect and attempt to be as realistic as possible, but I just allowed myself to be a bit flexible with it and say, I'm okay with a few things being in there to kind of show that this is constructed. Yeah. I hope that answers it. Sorry.
Aiden, you killed it. I wanna know what your favorite part was.
Favorite part of the whole thing, probably maybe making the cars. There's something weirdly challenging about that in a new way. I mean, sorry, favorite thing, job-wise, cinematography, like I said, but just randomly random fun moments on set. I think that making the cars was really satisfying in a weird way because they both presented unique challenges, and to get them in the state I needed them to, or thought I needed to get them into for the film, and just seeing the lights turn on in them was kind of magical.
Let's say we have time for one more. Yeah, really? So there are many sets. Did you do them in sequence of where you knew they would be in the story, or when did you start?
I started kind of randomly in there, actually. I think I started with that clip that's right after they leave the crossroads, and there's that big dust cloud behind it. I just thought, okay, I have the set up lengthwise. I'm gonna do a bunch of sets where I need that extra depth. I don't want width in my set. And I just started doing it a little bit randomly at first and slowly realizing, okay, I can make it a bit more planned out and strategic with my approach to the sets and the environments just by doing like what I mentioned earlier and kind of making a list in ones that feature similar environmental choices. Like if this is a scene that has a straightaway and I know that this other one that needs more of a lengthy set that also needs a straightaway, I'm gonna reuse the straightaway and just maybe have a different perspective for the camera so it doesn't look like that exact same straightaway. But that's a big thing that it came down to, is just how much can I do in a concise manner with my set building and have to rebuild as little as possible. And as I went, I kind of got a bit better at reusing some of those parts. But yes, I would recommend you definitely want to do things in a manner that lets you reuse as much as possible.
Okay. So what I'd love to do is ask everybody, but Carol now gets to deliberate. And so we're gonna ask everyone to, if you wouldn't mind stepping outside.